Hello world, Clinton here. Welcome to my 5-part series exploring Century of the Self, the Adam Curtis documentary from 2002, through the lens of McLuhan. I'm doing this because Kanye West, can you believe it, just tweeted out this 4-hour BBC documentary looking at the creation of consumerism, how society, makes people buy things, and how modern democracy and politics uses market research to get voters to vote for them. It's a very interesting documentary. So, watching it, I was like, man, there's so much potential here for me to explore McLuhan within it. So, let's start. Century of the Self. It's 4 parts long. It's about the spread of consumerism and post-war democracies. It's really worth watching. Take the time. Episode 1, you look at Sigmund Freud. It's, dream logic and the unconscious and how people are irrational and driven by things that they can't explain or understand. They don't know themselves very well, right? And this idea between citizens of a country as active, rational participants, which was encouraged by Roosevelt, according to the documentary, versus as passive consumers who just do what they're told by marketers and television and whatnot. Part 2 looks at this in the 50s, the post-war era. It looks at how theories of Freud were used to try to get people to, control themselves, control their inner drives, and, be properly socialized to conform to social codes, politeness, spirits of good citizenship, fight the commies, all that stuff. Looks at MK Ultra experiments going on in Montreal, with LSD and electroshock therapy, trying to erase people, and then using cassette tapes to psychically drive and program new personalities into them. Stuff like that. And then it gets into the 60s with episode 3 and beyond, which is the overthrow of all that conformism and the idea of repression with the countervailing hippie notion of express yourself, just be who you really are. Don't let society tell you what to do. Just let it all out. Chip away at your restraints and your defense mechanisms and just be the real you. All that sort of stuff. And then the documentary goes on to show how within a decade, the market responded to that by changing from just a few items that they sold you, which were all the same. Man, I want to be different from everyone else. Okay, so manufacturing changed, and marketers used polls to get into people's heads and started slotting people into wide different forms of identities, and then creating many different products to let you find the real you expressed through the products you bought, right? Like a whole bunch of different clothes, whole bunch of different cars, whole bunch of different stuff. More variety in the market. You can find the real you to buy and wear, right? And express yourself. We cater to all different lifestyles, right? So, system wins in the end there. Episode 4 brings us into politics. The idea of political... you got Reagan and Thatcher appealing to people's, individualism, and the people know what's right, let's listen to them, and all that stuff. And then political parties basically giving up on having, beliefs and just telling people what they want to hear to get their votes no matter what. Because if you don't win, then you're not in power, then what's the point of having a belief or a mandate, right? So, to begin this series, I like to look at the notion of what individualism means. Because apparently, watching this documentary is quite evident that Marshall McLuhan is the only guy who does not look at this express yourself, be yourself thing of the 60s, 70s, 80s, up to today as individualism. Everyone else calls it narcissism or, solipsism or consumerism, right? It's all about individualism, right? The individual who what they want is, was of paramount importance. Well, that's the exact opposite of how McLuhan uses the word individualism. It's amazing. Maybe no one understands McLuhan just because he uses the words completely backwards to everyone else. To McLuhan, an individual is someone who grew up with the printing press, but before television came along. To McLuhan, an individual is part of a public, not part of a mass. A public is a whole bunch of people who read the same newspapers and then can talk about them. not people who are all watching the same thing all together in simultaneous, resonating emotional connectedness, right? Mass, right? To McLuhan, individualism is as Protestantism, right? When the printing press was invented, the first thing that got printed and spread everywhere was Bibles, and then the church got overthrown, right? Protestantism is all about repression in the sense that I'm using the word here. It is a private point of view which is detached from the situation and analyzing and trying to be logical, and it leaves behind lots of subconscious things which aren't worked into your thoughts. Right, you're holding yourself back and you're controlling yourself, and you've got fragmented beings. Right, the world is compartmentalized into boxes which aren't all integrated into one whole, man, the whole big holistic picture. None of this whole big holistic picture stuff with individualism, according to McLuhan. And these are the people who can sacrifice for the greater good of the community, or who can be part of a public and try to understand things that they aren't a part of, and be detached from even their own interests to try and participate in the larger public. So that sense of participating in the public in the Century of the Self, the documentary, is the opposite of individualism in the documentary. What the documentary, Century of the Self, and everyone in it calls individualism, which is, the narcissism of being a total consumer in the later 20th century, is what McLuhan calls, the masses, or a return to tribalism or oral acoustic culture, because TV involves people so much in real time. It engages all of your senses, right? And you're not held back. You're always putting it out there. Your insides are drawn out, sucked out of your skull, right? There's no detachment. You're in it, immersion. You're living in the now, right? There's no future. There's no past. It's just full experience of the now, man. That's the opposite of individualism to McLuhan. But it's what marketers and politicians and analysts and psychologists seem to have defined that explicitly as everything's all about you. Okay, that's individualism, right? Very strange flipping. If McLuhan were to have made Century of the Self, he would have called it Century of the Masses. He would have said there is no self. So that's one way when you're watching this wonderful documentary to try to think about media literacy there. That's a big hurdle. If we can't even decide what the word individual means, then the semantics there are brutal. Next episode, I'm going to be looking at the role that the media plays in allowing the ideas of the psychologists and the marketers and whatnot that were talked about in Century of the Self, that even facilitated them to happen. Yeah, back on YouTube. This is fun. All right, see you then. Bye.